We're here today to talk about Work Design Magazine's The Next Work Environment competition. We see this as an opportunity to think beyond the traditional design and solutions, create work environments that focus on people, spaces that inspire, energize, and rejuvenate us. We've created this ongoing series interviewing industry experts, our jury members, to gain insights into their perspectives on the next work environment. Today, I'm very fortunate to be here with Dr. Ben Waber. Ben is the president and co-founder of Humanize. He's a visiting scientist at MIT Media Lab, and he previously worked as a senior researcher at Harvard Business School. Ben received his PhD from MIT. Ben's work centers around using real-time data flows to rethink management of people, physical architecture, corporate planning, and training, among other things. Ben wrote the book People Analytics: How Social Sensing Technology Will Transform Business and What It Tells Us About the Future of Work. In bringing the power of analytics to organizational development, he offers immense new opportunities to everyone with responsibility for workplace performance. So we're very excited to have Ben participate with us on this jury. Ben, maybe if I can ask you to start by telling us a little more about your background and what you're working on.
Yeah, so I guess he gave a very nice intro there. And really my background has been around trying to use data about how people interact and collaborate at work to really help understand the way that we should change how organizations are managed, and also a broad class of people decisions that companies make, and include the workplace in those kind of decisions. And I guess the motivation for a lot of that work is that I always assumed in the past that when a company made a new decision about, what sort of a new headquarters to build or how to reorganize a company, that of course they must collect a lot of data and run tests, which is of course not how these decisions work, right? Some executive reads an article about what some cool tech company does, and they say, oh, well, they must know what they're doing. Let's do the same thing as them. And that doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think that a lot of what I'm encouraged by today is that I feel that companies are starting to take a much harder look around how they make what I would argue are the most important decisions that they make. But so a lot of my academic work focused on trying to collect this kind of data, again, things like email, chat, meeting data, but also sensor data about the real world. And again, not really things like content or information about individuals, but really trying to understand basic questions about how much does engineering talk to the sales team? How many hours do people work? Really looking at the dynamics of communication, the dynamics of behavior within workplaces and places like home to try to understand the impact of different decisions that companies make. Again, if you think about, I could sit two teams next to each other. How does that change how they communicate? Being able to quantitatively answer that, then when we start to make decisions around workplaces, around how many people should work from home, really changes that from being just about subjective opinion, which still does matter, but really factoring in a lot of the hard metrics around how does this change behavior. And so after my academic work, we took a lot of that research and we're able to turn it into something where now we've deployed this kind of technology at companies to really put together at this point, I believe, the largest data set on workplace interaction that's out there. And so it's been fascinating looking at, obviously, that grow over time to where, now I can say that I actually know that the average number, that if you are an information worker globally, you have about a little bit less than 3 people that you will communicate with the equivalent on one-on-one interaction, a little bit over an hour a week, right? And that is something where as we get new customers now, we actually don't see that distribution change. And that's been really fascinating because in the past, again, this is 10, 12 years ago when we were doing academic research, we would collect data on a couple hundred people maybe. But now having data from, millions of people come in on a daily basis gives you a pretty interesting perspective on how work happens. And I think is obviously pretty interesting and important today because not just myself, but I don't think anyone really knows what that next step is going to be. And I think we're all really trying a number of different things. And so I'm sort of hopeful that not just companies like ourselves, but also working with, with designers, with also people in academia to try to understand really rapidly the different changes that we can make and their impact on how we work, I think is more important than ever right now.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I know a lot of your research has dealt with proximity and the way that people connect. And so I'm really curious, in this period of time where we're not proximate, and we're using technology like this, how do you see that changing the way that people interact?
It has been really fascinating, and actually, as we started to pull data from really across our customers to try to understand, it appears that in the first 3 to 4 weeks after companies implemented work from home, and again, this it looks similar in different regions of the world, the amount of time people interacted with their close collaborators, again, people you spend an hour or more with on a given week, and this is for like months and months, that went up by well over 50%, which
Wow.
is interesting because I actually wouldn't have expected that. But if you think about it, okay, these are people that you really need to work with closely. So, okay, you're going to schedule more meetings with them. You're going to make sure that we might have interacted a lot face to face in the past. I want to make sure we're not letting anything slip by. Now, that has come down, and in subsequent weeks, you start to see that reduce a little bit, but it's still significantly above what it was previously. The interaction patterns that seem to be most affected are these weaker connections that people have. If you look at folks that you spend on average 15 minutes to an hour with a week, that is down significantly. And loose connections, people that maybe only talk to once a month, that is just taking a nosedive, which I don't think is shocking, right? That these are people that you probably don't have a good business reason to talk to on a daily basis. And you might bump into them by the coffee machine in the office, and those interactions are still valuable. These people are typically in different social groups. That's where you're going to get new ideas. You're going to learn more about what other parts of the company are doing. And it would be hard to even schedule a formal meeting with someone like that, because you probably don't have a good reason to talk to them except maybe, hey, how's the weather? How's everyone doing? Which is still a good reason to talk to them. It's something that even at Humanize, what we've done is have random lunch pairings for people. So you get paired with one or two other people each week for lunch. And again, and sometimes you talk about work, but most of the time now it's, hey, have you seen any good TV shows that are out? How the kids doing? Those sort of things, because that's really what appears to be getting lost. And that what still is driving the interactions today, and this is fascinating, is where people were physically sitting in the office before they left. Of
Interesting.
course, some people were working remotely before, and their patterns have not changed as significantly, although they have changed. Um, but I do see, you still see those patterns persist.
I find most of the time I absorb a lot of information just from walking through the office. And I think that's the piece that I
Yeah,
need most,
yeah,
little bits of information. So,
absolutely. Well, if we go into an office, and one of the big reasons to be in an office is to informally interact with other people, how can you create an environment where I still have to be 2 meters away from you, but we can actually have an informal conversation, um, and an impromptu conversation without being really disruptive to lots of other people? I mean, this is obviously a beef that lots of people have had with things like open offices, but I do think that if the culture of an office can change such that people, if you don't want to be interrupted, you definitely put on headphones, and that the expectation is that it will be noisier, in an office environment, but that, um, and that if you really need to get individual work done, that's when you go home. But actually coming to the office, it's going to be noisier. People are going to be more spread out. Um, I think that has been one of the things we've seen in from some of the data coming in so far, is that it's unclear the best way to navigate those different concerns, and that you've got these health concerns as well as what do you actually want to get from the office. To your point, there are these, just sort of getting a feel of the environment, and just the fact that you're near other people, you get a sense for some of the things that are going on. I do think that there is value there, as well as value in the fact that people who have kids or other distractions at home, being able to remove yourself from that for a couple hours is desirable. And so I do think that it's the question of, all right, well, first, which parts of the company have been most impacted in terms of how they work by having to work from home? Right? And those are the ones that we're going to try to move in first. Also, then taking into account, risk levels. If you've got teams with a bunch of older people on the team, then there's also higher risk levels there. And so it is an incredibly complex decision. But I think what I have seen it's been very interesting is that companies have been very fluid and very transparent in their decision making. We are going to try this thing and we don't know if it's going to work, right? And that if it doesn't work, we're going to try something else. And I think that's an incredibly healthy uh, process in general. I don't think this should be just limited to now. Even when we design offices, we pretend that we know this is the right one. We say this is the right design for us, or this is the right training. We don't know. And again, it's a hypothesis, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think there is something freeing in that no one can plausibly claim to know what they're doing. And so I'm hopeful that that will also continue, and that a lot of just that really rapid change that I've been at least seeing in parts of Asia, I hope we bring that over here as well.
One of the things I read that you had written was about how leaders should really define what that interaction is like and create the space for that interaction to happen. How do you see that playing into this?
Physical space is the most powerful organizer we have for directing the way the collaboration happens. We should think a lot about formal reporting structures and things like that. At the same time, being able to say how much should team A and team B communicate. Those are things that leaders should be able to not just say, oh, well, I think 20% of the time, but have a pretty plausible range around, I actually know what that target is, and I'm going to try to design work such that that is more likely to happen. We might schedule stand-up meetings in those formal processes. I might just sit groups next to each other, or I might separate groups, or actually they're collaborating a lot more than I think they need to. And again, then you, of course, want to validate that and actually talk to people. Say, hey, I noticed you're talking a lot to this other team. What's going on? And it's likely there's something that you missed that's important. But it also could be that just you didn't realize there's a bunch of people who are buddies on both those teams. And it's totally fine for them to interact with each other, but that for work purposes, I want them to sit closer to other people to increase that interaction. Those are KPIs that the vast majority of companies just don't have today. That we think about KPIs when it comes to how we work. We think about performance ratings. We even think about real estate cost per square foot, and those are important numbers. It's nothing wrong with measuring those, but that in terms of the long-term outcomes for the company, really, it's really about, are we collaborating effectively? And it is really hard to quantify that. I mean, obviously that's a lot of the work that we've done, but if you're doing knowledge work, I mean, again, if you're developing a new drug in a pharmaceutical company, if you're building some complex software, what you do now turns into outcomes in months or years. And I think that that's actually one of the concerns that I have in the medium to long term, is that I don't actually feel like, from what we're seeing in the data, that short-term productivity is going to be incredibly impacted. And of course, there's some factors where that's true. But if you think about longer term, the fact that these unplanned interactions, things you can't possibly plan, right, that tend to lead to innovation, that tend to lead to, again, just better milestone attainment, those interactions are lacking. And so I do think that some of the results we're going to see coming out over the next couple of years, some people might write off poor results or just frankly poor products or services to poor economic conditions. But it's actually likely that a lion's share of that is due to changes in collaboration that we see now that leaders aren't accounting for, and that are not really properly planning for when we come back into the office, and really making that a priority to say, here's what we want to happen, and we are going to try a number of different things in terms of technologies, in terms of physical space, to get us to that point in terms of how we collaborate. The CEO drilling in and actually having those conversations, I think leadership modeling these behaviors is incredibly important. Because if previously you had a quiet workplace and that was the norm, the only way people are going to change is if leadership shows that behavior and actually rewards that behavior. Says, hey, you know what, if we have our weekly town hall, I was walking through this floor of the office and I saw people in team X and team Y having a nice discussion about this, and that was great. That's exactly what we want to see. Things like that, they might not seem like a big deal, but it are huge for driving the behaviors that we want to see in the workplace. Because I think that we can only, whether it's through processes or even design, we can only create so much. There's this next step where you do need that culture to change, and it is incumbent upon people who are in leadership roles in the company to show that as well.
Ben, this has been great. Lots of fascinating information to think about. I've been thrilled to have you as part of this jury. Thank you very much for your insight and your participation.
Looking forward to it as well.